Hi, this is Aslı Turan Zara. I'm a PhD on international relations, and my research focuses on English school theory of IR, humanitarian intervention, and responsibility to protect, and also ethics of international society. So this is an introductory video, I can say 101 of just for thinking humanitarian intervention and responsibility to protect. Hi. This is a series of 2 videos on just war thinking, humanitarian intervention, and the responsibility to protect. I will start the first video with explaining and defining just war and by analyzing the philosophical background of just war thinking. I will tell who are the actors of just war, and I will give an example from history. Then I will continue by defining humanitarian intervention. I will explain the legal background of that concept. I will explain the political approaches to the concept, the diversifying political discourses. I will explain the actors of humanitarian intervention, state and non-state actors actually, and I will give some examples from 90s. In the second video, I will start by explaining the responsibility to protect. When the report of R2P was adopted, why this kind of report was needed by the international society, and how it was supposed to change some concepts like the humanitarian intervention, like sovereignty, like the international responsibility, and the protection. I will explain what is the legal background of the responsibility to protect. Is it a norm, a doctrine, or a principle? I will talk about the political discourse on the R2P and the consistency with the practice. I will try to analyze the dilemma inherent to responsibility to protect. I will tell you the actors of the R2P, state and non-state actors, like I would do in humanitarian intervention. And I will explain you the example of Libya in relation with the R2P. So let's start by understanding what is the just war theory, the just war thinking. The just war idea has born in Middle Age philosophy with St. Augustine. According to St. Augustine, whoever resorts to war must have a legitimate jurisdiction. So the first criterion is the existence of a just authority, which means that it's sovereign. And this war must be declared for a just cause. So this is the second criterion. The just cause is a mission of promoting peace and Christian order and the motivation to punish the evil. So when St. Augustine was talking about a just cause, there was an evident religious reference. St. Thomas of Aquin said the third criterion to these ones, the just intention of resorting to war. This intention should not aim domination, revenge, or hatred. So according to St. Thomas of Aquinas, a just war should not have a personal interest, but should have a social interest. And this would be a just intention. These criteria are supplemented by other criteria such as war as a last resort. So the use of force should only be the last choice for the just authority. And the proportionality is another important condition of a just war, which suggests that the means should be proportional with the initial reasons for the use of force. A reasonable estimate, so an assessment of the possibility of achieving the desired result, is another important criterion for calling a war as a just war. During Renaissance period, Vittoria and Suarez argued that a just war can also be waged against injustices and human solidarity. So here there are 2 criteria added. the existence of an unjust situation and the need for human solidarity. In 17th century, Grotius claimed that the rights of societies who are suffering from an oppressor should be at the core of a just war. So here there are new criteria added. The rights of societies, a situation where societies are suffering, and existence of an oppressor. Who are the actors of just war then? The actors of a just war are legitimate entities, legitimate authorities. That could be a prince, that could be a state. But what is important is that these legitimate entities should be considered to have the right of legitimate jurisdiction and the right to resort to military tools. I will give an example from history. Great Britain and France coming to assist the Greek revolutions in 19th century against the Ottoman Empire is an example of a just war. There was still a sensibility over religious unity in this, because the main argument was based on the protection of the rights of Christian minorities. So we have a religious and cultural ties reference in this example. What about the humanitarian intervention? So in 20th century, just war tradition led to this new concept. In the post-World War II atmosphere, the interest of protecting foreigners suffering from oppression by their own government took its place on the international relations agenda. So here, remember what was saying Grotius in 17th century. We have the interest of protecting the rights of people, the rights of societies who are suffering from an oppressor. So in this perspective of post-World War II, regardless religious ties, the international society seek to protect a suffering society. So humanitarian intervention is by definition an action undertaken for humanitarian reasons and against a state where the people are suffering from massive human rights violations without the express consent of the state concerned. So humanitarian intervention is a different category from military or non-military intervention because of its undertaking in the name of humanitarian causes. And the debate generates on international law that we will see in several minutes. In the classic sense, humanitarian intervention is a coercive action by one or a group of states, resorting to the use of armed force in a third state without the consent of the state, with the aim of preventing the suffering and death of the civilian people of the state intervened. Here, the civilian people emphasis is important because when we are talking about an operation of humanitarian intervention, we are talking about the inhabitants of the state intervened. We are not talking about a specific citizen group. So what is the legal background of human rights protection that is triggering the humanitarian intervention? The Universal Declaration of Human Rights of the General Assembly of the United Nations of 1948 made clear reference to universal human rights. In 1948, the Convention for the Prevention and Punishment of the Crime of Genocide. The Geneva Conventions in 1949 defining the rules of armed conflict. In 1950, the European Convention for the Protection of Human Rights and Fundamental Freedoms. The International Conventions of 1969, known as Twins, concerning civil and political rights, economic, social, and cultural rights, are all remarkable steps in the evolution of human rights and fundamental freedoms, triggering the humanitarian intervention debates. Yet neither has created a responsible human rights enforcement mechanism due to states' unwillingness to be monitored by a higher body. So there are some normative gaps and there are some diversifying approaches for humanitarian intervention. The United Nations was founded in 1945 with the aim of saving future generations from the scourge of war. In this perspective, the Charter was constituted on the objective of maintaining international peace and security. The conditions for the use of force have been defined by specific rules prohibiting an attack on the territorial integrity and political independence of states, with the Article 2 of the Charter, with the exception of self-defense by the Article 51 of the Charter, and a system of collective security has been built. The competence of the Security Council with respect to threats to peace, breaches of the peace, and acts of aggression was defined by Article 41 and 42. These states being therefore committed to respecting human rights with human rights documents, agreements, and treaties that we have seen, still make use of the normative gaps by taking advantage of the international society, stripped of the mechanisms of control and binding force over them. So these shortcomings encourage governments to abuse human rights and place other members of international society in a position of dilemma between non-intervention in the internal affairs of a state and being accused of moral indifference due to their inaction against human rights violations. So there is a dilemma of undertaking military action for humanitarian reasons and respecting the sovereignty of a state, which requires respect for the principles of non-intervention and non-use of force, still persists. Who are the actors of humanitarian intervention? We have state actors and we have non-state actors. And United Nations General Assembly plays an important role by providing a platform where there are possibilities to talk about controversial situations that are making human rights protection at the center of the international agenda when UN Security Council is blocked, for example, by one or two of the permanent members of the Security Council. The European Union is an important actor for the promotion of human rights through its normative power over candidate states and over neighborhood policy initiative. It plays an important role to reconstruct political and jurisdictional life of a country. NATO is an important actor for the military implementation of a humanitarian intervention operation. Non-governmental organizations are also very important, and I want to mention Doctors Without Borders. This was the main NGO that played the role on promoting humanitarian intervention concept based on their African experiences, and that highlighted the necessity to go to help suffering people around the world. Human Rights Watch is also so important because they do an amazing job to force the international society to face humanitarian tragedies. States may be called as the main actors, first of all, as perpetrators of massive human rights violations that cause actually an implementation of a humanitarian intervention. Also, they play a role as individual member of the international society, and also they play an important role as members of international organizations. Now let's talk about the examples of humanitarian intervention from 90s. Let's start with Somalia. The outbreak of a civil war in Somalia, followed by the collapse of the state, had difficulties to focus on international society's attention and concern. After huge civil deaths, the United Nations Security Council adopted the Resolution 794 for the first time, allowing the use of force for humanitarian purposes. But here it is important to know that this resolution was grounded on the lack of a government. So the resolution and the humanitarian intervention was not considered as a way to go against a sovereign state. In Rwanda, while genocide was being perpetrated, international society was reluctant to call it so and to act against it to protect civilian people in order not to be engaged with Genocide Prevention Convention. The inaction of international society waited for the death of thousands of hundreds of people, and the only outcome was the foundation of International Criminal Tribunal for Rwanda by the United Nations. The unacceptable approach of the international society was the same during the War of Yugoslavia in Bosnia and Kosovo. Civilian people did not find immediate support from the members of the international society. There was even a lack of consensus on how to call the war in Bosnia. Some called it as a civil war, some called it as a self-determination war. But in the end, there was a new concept emerged, which is an ethnic cleansing to describe the tragedy in Bosnia. Unfortunately, the UN adopted some unfortunate decisions, and in the end, it created the International Criminal Tribunal for ex-Yugoslavia. The Kosovo case was significant for the understanding of humanitarian intervention because for the first time, under the leadership of the United States, NATO acted without United Nations Security Council authorization, which led to a new debate about the legality and the legitimacy of intervention. The international society had the consensus on calling this intervention as illegal because NATO started the operation without authorization of the Security Council, but it was also considered as legitimate because the operation was realized for the sake of protecting the civilian people in Kosovo. And as the authorization of the Security Council was blocked by Russia, this was like a bypass, bypassing this blockade. So this is why it was considered as legitimate. Okay, here were the fundamentals of just war thinking and humanitarian intervention. Now you can continue to listen to the second video for responsibility to protect 101. See you there, and please leave your comments and questions below. Thank you.